American in his 50s impregnates 10 women during pilgrimage. Through India, they call it destiny. The first thing you noticed was the silence. It's not an absence of sound. The air hummed with the drone of 1,000 unseen insects, and a low rhythmic chanting drifted from the stone temple, clinging to the mountainside, but an absence of noise. In Devgiri, a village cradled in the green folds of the Himalayas, there was no rattle of engines, no blare of horns, no frantic pulse of a world Arthur had spent 52 years trying to conquer, and which had, in the end, ground him to dust here. The silence was a presence. It was in the way the 10 pregnant women moved around him, their bare feet whispering against the packed earth. It was in the weight of their gaze, a mixture of reverence and something deeper, something fiercely proprietary. They were his keepers, his acolytes, his family. The swell of their bellies beneath their saffron and crimson saris was the only clock that mattered. A young woman named Leela, her face as open and clear as the mountain sky, knelt and offered him a brass cup of cool water. Her belly was the most pronounced, the life within it a promise soon to be kept. She didn't speak, merely watched his lips as he drank. Her hand rested for a moment on his knee, a touch that was not sexual, but elemental, a tether to this strange, new earth. Across the small courtyard, Priya the first, the wisest, watched them both. Her own womb was just beginning to curve, a secret shared between her, Arthur, and the goddess whose temple loomed above them. 10 of them. From lithe Lela, barely 20, to Sarita, a widow in her late 40s, whose eyes held the same exhausted grief Arthur recognized in the mirror. All of them carrying life. His life, they said. His destiny. An American journalist, a wiry, cynical man who'd somehow bribed and bullied his way up the treacherous mountain path, was crouched a respectful distance away, his camera inert in his lap. We'd been here 3 days, trying to crack the story, his modern skepticism eroding with every passing hour. I don't get it. The journalist Miller had rasped the day before, his voice a sacrilege in the quiet air. They say you haven't left this village in a year, eh? Say you came here to die. Arthur had simply looked at the 10 radiant women, their orbits all centered on him, the broken star. He felt the phantom weight of a small hand in his, the echo of a child's laugh that had been silenced a decade ago. He looked at Miller, man still plugged into the matrix of ambition and deadlines and noise, felt a profound pity. I did, Arthur had answered, his voice rough from disuse. But destiny, it seems, is a poor negotiator. Miller now gestured with his chin towards the women. And them? What do they call it? Priya answered before Arthur could. Her English was precise, learned from a missionary school in her youth. We call it the blessing of Marty Davy, she said, her eyes fixed on Arthur. We call it the monsoon after a lifetime of drought. We call it truth. Arthur felt the familiar coil of shame and ecstasy tighten in his gut. The truth was a far more complex and terrifying thing than these women knew. Or perhaps they knew a deeper truth than he could ever comprehend. A truth that had begun a year ago with the sale of a 4-bedroom house in suburban Michigan. A house that had become a mausoleum. It sold the furniture, the cars, the lawnmower. Kept only one thing, a small wooden box filled with the detritus of a life cut short a bronze baby shoe, chipped world's best dad mug, a faded photograph of a boy named Noah, his smile a sunburst of missing teeth. The box was his penance, his last link to a world where he had been a husband, father, a man with a future. The divorce had been brutally civil. Claire couldn't look at him anymore. His face was a mirror of her own grief, a constant reminder. Of the empty bedroom down the hall, of the silence that had devoured their marriage whole. The day he signed the papers, he felt not sadness, but a terrifying, exhilarating lightness. He was untethered, a ghost in his own life. The business he'd built, a successful consulting firm, had been a casualty of his sorrow, his ambition. Withered on the vine, failure wasn't a single event for Arthur. It was a climate, the very air he breathed. He bought a one-way ticket to Delhi. It wasn't a spiritual quest. It wasn't seeking enlightenment or chanting mantras. It was seeking oblivion. He wanted to be swallowed by a place so vast and chaotic and indifferent that his own small, sharp-edged pain would be rendered insignificant. He wanted to disappear, India delivered. The sensory assault of Delhi, the riot of color, the symphony of horns, the press of a billion lives, the thick, cloying smell of spice and sewage and marigolds was exactly the anesthetic he craved. For weeks, he drifted. He rode crowded trains to nowhere in particular, slept in cheap guest houses, and ate food that set his mouth on fire. He was an observer, a phantom, his grief a protective cloak that rendered him invisible. He let his beard grow, his hair thin, his skin darken under the relentless sun. He was shedding the skin of Arthur Finch, the failed father, the grieving husband, the bankrupt businessman. It was in a dusty, fly-blown chai stall in Rishikesh that he first heard the name Devgiri. The old man who told him about it spoke in hushed tones as if the village were a myth, a place forgotten by time, high in the mountains where the old gods still demanded their due. A village of women, he'd said. A village under a curse. A curse. Arthur had asked, the word catching in his throat. No sons have been born in a generation, the old man whispered, his eyes wide. And for 10 years, no children at all. The wombs of Devgiri are barren. The goddess sleeps, and the village is dying. Something in the story resonated with the barrenness in his own soul. A village without children. An entire community hollowed out by the same silence that haunted his Michigan home. He wasn't drawn by a desire to help, but by a morbid curiosity, a kinship of emptiness. He paid a guide a ludicrous sum to take him there, a multi-day trek that climbed from the humid plains into the crisp, lung-stinging air of the high Himalayas. The journey was brutal. It stripped away the last vestiges of his Western softness, leaving him raw, exhausted, and feverish. He arrived at the gates of Devgiri not as a savior, but as a supplicant. Collapsing into the arms of the first people he saw, he woke on a cool straw mat, the scent of antiseptic herbs filling his nostrils. A woman with eyes the color of dark, honey and streaks of silver in her black hair, was placing a cool, damp cloth on his forehead. It was Priya. She was the village elder, its matriarch, though she couldn't have been much older than 40. She nursed him with broths and strange, bitter teas. For days, he drifted in and out of a fever dream, the ghosts of his past mingling with the quiet. Curious faces of the village women who came to stare at the strange, broken foreigner who had fallen from the sky. As his strength returned, he saw the truth of the old man's story. Devgiri was achingly beautiful. A cluster of stone and wood houses clinging to a terraced hillside, surrounded by fields of millet and wildflowers. But it was also dying. There were no shouts of children playing, no crying babies. The faces of the women, from the youngest to the oldest, were etched with a quiet desperation. He saw it in the way they touched the small, weathered stone idols of Marty Davy, the Earth Mother, whose shrine stood at the heart of the village, adorned with wilting flowers. He had no intention of staying. But the days turned into weeks. He began to help his old life as a man who fixed things, businesses, balance sheets, broken sprinkler head surfacing. He repaired a collapsed irrigation channel. He helped rethatch a roof damaged by the monsoon. For the first time in years, he felt useful. His hands, once soft from pushing paper, became calloused and capable. His body, once thickened by a sedentary life of grief, grew lean and hard. He started to talk. He didn't mean to. One evening, sitting with a group of women around a communal fire, Sarita, the widow whose eyes mirrored his own loss, asked him about his family. The Hindi word she used, Parivar, was so soft, so full of longing that it broke something open in him, and he told them about Noah. He spoke of his son's obsession with dinosaurs, the way he smelled after a bath, the unbearable weight of his small coffin. The women didn't offer platitudes or condolences. They simply listened, their own collective grief creating a space for his. Leela, whose husband had been taken by a landslide 2 years prior, placed her hand on his arm, and in that simple, human touch, Arthur felt a flicker of connection he thought had been extinguished forever. He was becoming part of the village's rhythm. He was no longer the outsider, the foreigner. He was Arthur, the quiet man with the sad eyes who could fix anything. He was safe here, cocooned in their shared sorrow, a world away from the accusing silence of his past. He didn't realize he was being seduced, not by a woman, but by a need. Their need, and his own. The moral dilemma, when it came, was not a sudden choice, but a slow, creeping dawn. It began, as all things in Devgiri did, with Priya. She came to his small hut one night, the moon casting long shadows across the valley. She carried a single oil lamp, its flame dancing in her dark eyes. "The goddess is pleased with you, Arthur," she said, her voice low. "You have brought a man's strength back to our village. You've honored the earth with your work." He felt a flush of pride. Childish and pathetic. "I just fixed a ditch, Priya." "You did more than that," she insisted, stepping closer. The hut was small, space between them, charged with the scent of jasmine from her hair and the wood smoke clinging to his clothes. "You have watered a dry land. But the soil itself remains barren." She looked at him, her gaze so intense. It felt like a physical touch. "Our wombs are closed. The men we had are gone or old. The goddess sleeps. She needs to be awoken." Arthur's heart began to thump a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He was an atheist, a man of spreadsheets and logic. He knew about biology, about fertility, about the cruel randomness of nature. Didn't believe in sleeping goddesses. "Priya, I don't understand." "The old times," she explained, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "When the village faced a great drought or famine, a stranger would sometimes arrive, a traveler, a pilgrim. Someone untouched by our curse, he would be chosen, not as a man, but as an instrument, a vessel for the divine seed. He would perform the sacred union with a daughter of the village, not in passion, but in prayer, to awaken Marty Davy, to remind her of her children." The air in the hut grew thick, heavy. Arthur could hear the blood pounding in his ears. This was it, the precipice. He was a 52-year-old man, a grieving wreck who had sought oblivion, and found this, a pagan ritual, a spiritual seduction. It was insane. It was predatory. His Western mind screamed at him, exploitation, delusion, run. But another voice, a deeper, lonelier voice, whispered back. He looked at Priya's face, not with desire, but with a dizzying sense of vertigo. He saw in her eyes the reflection of an entire village's hope. He saw purpose, a meaning so profound and terrifyingly simple it stole his breath. They weren't asking for a lover. They were asking for a miracle. They had chosen him to deliver it. He thought of his sterile life, his dead son, the absolute meaninglessness of his existence back home. Here he was being offered a chance to create life itself. "I can't," he stammered, the words tasting like ash. "Priya, this is wrong." "What is wrong?" she asked, her voice soft yet unyielding. Is it wrong for a field too? Ask for rain? Is it wrong for a mother to want a child? We are not asking for love, Arthur. We are asking for life. We are asking you to be the key that unlocks the goddess's blessing." He felt torn, ripped in two. His deeply ingrained ethics, his sense of propriety, his fear was all at war with the irresistible temptation of being needed. Not just wanted, but fundamentally, biblically necessary. To be the answer to a prayer for a man who had felt. Like a cosmic mistake for a decade, it was a pull stronger than gravity. Would he do it? Could he cross that line? He looked at Priya, at the desperate hope that made her beautiful. Felt his own morality begin to dissolve like salt in water. He thought of Noah, of the terrible final silence of the hospital room. He thought of the vasectomy he'd undergone 25 years ago. After Noah was born, a decision made in a moment of youthful certainty that one perfect child was enough. A secret he had never even shared with Claire. A secret that made this entire insane proposition a biological impossibility. And in that moment of stark, private truth, a new, more dangerous thought bloomed in his mind. If he couldn't be the father, could he be the placebo? Could their faith be so powerful that it only needed a vessel, a symbol, to work its magic? The thought was blasphemous, a deception of the highest order. But it was also a kind of salvation, for them and for him. Could give them the ritual, the symbol they needed, could play the part of the divine instrument. And if a miracle happened, it wouldn't be his, it would be theirs. Testament to their faith alone. It would be a fraud, but a holy fraud. A lie that could create life. He looked at Priya, the lamplight carving canyons of shadow on her face. He took a deep breath, the thin mountain air feeling like a final sacrament. "I will do it," he said. And with those 4 words, Arthur Finch, the man from Michigan, ceased to exist. He had made his choice. He had stepped out of his world and into theirs forever. The line between right and wrong did not blur. It evaporated. The first ritual, with Priya, was nothing like he had imagined. There was no furtive passion, no shameful fumbling in the dark. It was a solemn, public affair. The village elders led them to the shrine of Marty Devi, the air thick with the smoke of juniper and sandalwood. They were bathed in sanctified water, dressed in ceremonial robes, and made to drink a heady, fermented rice wine that left Arthur's mind floating. Detached from his body, he felt less like a participant and more like an icon being moved into. Position. The union itself, which took place within the cool, dark sanctum of the small temple, was devoid of carnality. It was slow, deliberate, a rite as old as the stones around them. He looked into Priya's eyes and saw not a lover, but a high priestess communing with her god. He was merely the conduit, a piece of the ceremony. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he were watching himself from a great distance. His secret, his sterility, was a cold, hard stone in his gut, a silent act of cosmic deception. He was a liar, a charlatan playing God. He expected to wake the next day, crippled by guilt. Instead, he felt calm. The village treated him no differently, yet everything was different. There was a new current running through the quiet air. Hope, fragile, tender green shoot pushing its way through dry earth. 6 weeks later, Priya announced she was pregnant. The village erupted. Not in a wild, chaotic celebration, but in a deep, collective sigh of relief, of joy so profound it was almost silent. They gathered at the shrine, their faces turned to the sky, tears streaming down their weathered cheeks. They didn't praise Arthur. They praised the goddess. He had been, as Priya had promised, the key. His role was sacred, but impersonal. The miracle was Marty Davies. Arthur watched it all, his heart a turbulent sea of emotions. He felt a dizzying relief that their faith had been rewarded, and a stomach-churning guilt at the lie underpinning it all. But whose lie was it? He hadn't made her pregnant. His sterile body was proof of that. So, what had? Had she taken a lover from a nearby village in secret? Was this a conspiracy of women, a grand, benevolent deception to save their community, with him as the unwitting public face? Or was it something else? A miracle born of pure, unadulterated faith, a psychogenic pregnancy that had somehow become real. He didn't know the answer, and he found he was terrified to ask. Knowing would shatter the beautiful, fragile thing they had built. Soon the elders approached him again. The goddess was awake, they explained, but the village had many barren fields. It was his duty, his dharma, to be the vessel for others. He was no longer just Arthur. They began to call him Davapurash, the god-man. The moral calculus in his head had been short-circuited. His Western ethics were a foreign language in this place. Here, the survival of the community, the continuation of life, was the supreme morality. Who was he to impose his small individualistic code on their ancient truths? And so it began. One by one, he was brought to the temple. With Layla, the young widow, whose touch was as gentle as a prayer. She wept through the ritual, not from sadness, but from a desperate, heartbreaking hope. He found himself wanting to comfort her, to hold her, to be a father to her, in a way he could no longer be for Noah, with Sarita, the older widow, whose grief was a mirror of his own. Their union was a quiet, solemn merging of two solitudes. With Kavita, the skeptic who had watched him with suspicious eyes for months, her eventual participation was the village's final, absolute acceptance of the miracle. She came to him not with reverence, but with a fierce, challenging glare, as if daring the universe to prove her wrong. And one by one, they became pregnant. Layla, Sarita, Kavita, and then 6 more. A total of 10. Arthur's life became a strange dream. He was a patriarch, a spiritual figurehead, a living fertility symbol. The women cared for him, fed him, mended his clothes, and surrounded him with a cocoon of devotion. He was living in the heart of a polygamous, theocratic family he had neither chosen nor biologically created. The power dynamic was intoxicating and terrifying. He was their savior, but he was also their captive, bound by their faith in his own monumental deceit. He would sometimes catch his reflection in a pail of water and fail to recognize the man looking back. The haunted, hollowed-out grief in his eyes had been replaced by something else, something more complex. It was peace, yes, but a peace built on a lie. It was love, but a love born of collective delusion. He was both a healer and a disease, a saint and a sinner. The most wrong but tempting moments were not in the temple. They were in the quiet domesticity that followed. It was the way Lila would bring him his morning tea, her hand resting on her swelling belly, a silent acknowledgement of the life they were all pretending he had created. It was the way the children from the last generation, now teenagers, would seek his advice on mending a tool or ask for stories of the outside world, a world he no longer felt part of. He was a father again, a grandfather almost. He was surrounded by a family that was both real and entirely illusory. He shouldn't want this. He shouldn't find solace in this grand deception, but he did. It was a balm on the raw, festering wound of his past. He was an addict, and his drug was their faith. He stopped thinking about his sterility. The secret was buried so deep it had almost ceased to exist, a geological layer of a former life. In Devgiri, where faith could move mountains and awaken goddesses, the mundane truths of Western medicine seemed irrelevant, almost comical. Here he was potent. He was life itself. The evidence was all around him, in the 10 ripening wombs that held the future of the village. The line wasn't blurry anymore. He had crossed it so long ago, he could no longer even see it. The outside world arrived in the form of a rattling, mud-spattered jeep. It brought Dr. Anil Sharma, a man from the State Health Ministry, a man of science, data, and unshakable modern logic. He was making a long-overdue survey of the remote mountain villages, and his arrival in Devgiri was like a stone dropped into a perfectly still pond. Dr. Sharma was a kind man, pragmatic and sharp, in his late 30s. At first he was amazed. He saw a village thriving, clean, orderly. He saw healthy women. Then he saw the pregnancies, all of them. And he saw Arthur, the lone white man, the focal point of their devotion. His professional curiosity quickly soured into suspicion then. Horror, he found Arthur alone, tending to the small vegetable patch he had cultivated near his hut. "Mr. Finch," Dr. Sharma began, his voice tight with a carefully controlled outrage. "I have been speaking with the women, with Priya. They have told me a remarkable story." Arthur straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He met the doctor's gaze. He had known this day would come. A part of him had been dreading it, another part almost craving the confrontation, the collision of his two worlds. "It is a remarkable place, doctor. It is a place of profound and I suspect criminal delusion," Dr. Sharma countered, his voice low and sharp. 10 pregnant women, all claiming the same father, a foreigner 52 years of age. From a medical standpoint, it is a statistical absurdity. From a moral standpoint, you let the word hang in the air. It is monstrous. Arthur felt a flare of anger. "You've been here for 2 days. You see charts and statistics? I have lived their lives with them for a year. You see a monster? They see a miracle. I see a charismatic charlatan preying on a desperate, isolated community." Dr. Sharma's professional composure finally snapped. "These women are uneducated. They're steeped in superstition. You are an educated man from the West. You have a responsibility. What you have done here, it's a form of mass abuse. Cult of personality built around your libido. The accusation, so logical from the outside, felt utterly alien. To the reality Arthur was living, he wasn't a predator. He was something else. Something he didn't have a name for. This village was dying, Dr. Arthur said, his voice quiet yet firm. I came here and found only grief. Now there is joy. There is hope. There is a future. You call it delusion. They call it life. Who are you to say your truth is better than theirs? Dr. Sharma was shaking his head, his face a mask of disbelief and disgust. This can't continue. I have a duty. I have to report this. To the police, to your embassy. They need to be protected from you. He took a step closer, his voice dropping. I am leaving in the morning. Come with me, Mr. Finch. We can get you out of here before this becomes an international incident. We can say you were held against your will, that you were ill. A way out, a chance to return to sanity. This was the moment. Unforgivable decision. Redemption or ruin. Truth or comfort. Loyalty or freedom. Dr. Sharma was offering him an escape hatch back to the world he knew, the world of logic and laws and sterile certainties. A world where he was a failure, a ghost, a grieving man with no family. Or he could stay here, in Deviri, the God-man, the holy fraud. The beloved father of children that were not his. Living a lie that felt more true than anything he had ever known. He looked past the doctor, towards the center of the village. He saw Leela and Sarita sitting. Together, grinding spices, their pregnant forms a picture of serene domestic harmony. He saw Priya emerge from the temple, her face calm and luminous. He heard the distant sound of the teenagers laughing. This was his world now, his family, his life. He turned back to Dr. Sharma. There was no conflict in his eyes, only a profound, unsettling peace. Thank you for your concern, Doctor, Arthur said. But I am home. Dr. Sharma stared at him, aghast. You're choosing this fantasy? Is he a disease? Arthur said, the words coming to him from a place of absolute clarity. I see the cure. He had made his choice. Had chosen the lie. He had chosen to remain the God-man of Devgiri. From the outside, it was an unforgivable act, the final confirmation of his monstrosity. From the inside, it felt like the only sane, logical, and emotionally justified decision he could possibly make. He had chosen them. Dr. Sharma, a man of science, could not let it go. His mind, trained in diagnosis and evidence, saw a puzzle that needed to be solved, a sickness that needed to be exposed. He believed Arthur was a liar, but he needed proof. He needed to shatter the myth for the sake of the women he believed were victims. The next morning, just as his jeep was being loaded, he approached Arthur under the guise of a final medical check. For my report, he said, his tone clipped, and professional. I need to document your health. A simple blood sample, to show the ministry you are well, that you are not being held captive by some tropical illness that has addled your brain. Arthur knew it was a lie. He could see the prosecutorial glint in the doctor's eyes, but he agreed. To refuse would be to admit he had something to hide. He sat on a stool, bared his arm, and felt the sharp prick of the needle. He watched his own dark mortal blood fill the vial, a stark contrast to the divine ichor the villagers believed flowed through his veins. He handed the sample to Dr. Sharma with a steady hand. Their eyes met, a silent battle of two irreconcilable worlds. The doctor was gone for hours. Running the sample through a portable analysis kit in his jeep, Arthur went about his day. He helped mend a fence. He ate his midday meal surrounded by the women. He listened to Leela talk about the name she was considering for her baby. But a quiet tension settled over him. The final seal on his secret was about to be tested. Just before sunset, Dr. Sharma found him at the edge of the village, looking out over the vast purple expanse of the Himalayas. The doctor wasn't angry anymore. He looked pale, shaken, his scientific certainty completely hollowed out. He held a small printout from his machine in a trembling hand. I don't understand, Dr. Sharma whispered, his voice ragged. He wasn't speaking to Arthur, but to the universe. What don't you understand, Doctor? Arthur asked, not turning around. The blood test, Sharma said, stepping up beside him. The preliminary genetic markers are clear. More importantly, what isn't there is clear. He looked at Arthur, his eyes wide with confusion. You're sterile, Mr. Finch. The report indicates a vasectomy, an old one. Very clean. Medically, you are completely and utterly incapable of fathering a child. You have been for decades. This was it. The moment of revelation, the twist that would reframe everything. Arthur finally turned to face the doctor. Felt no panic, no fear, only the quiet, heavy finality of the truth. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Yes, Arthur said, after my son was born. 25 years ago. Dr. Sharma staggered back as if struck. The entire narrative he had constructed of a predator, a lustful cult leader, crumbled to dust in an instant. The foundation of his moral outrage was gone, replaced by a dizzying, terrifying void of understanding. But that's impossible, he stammered, now gesturing wildly towards the village where the 10 pregnant women were preparing for their evening meal. They are not impossible. I've examined them. They're pregnant. Genuinely pregnant. So how? Who? Arthur looked out at the village, his family. He saw Priya lighting the evening lamps, her movements slow and graceful. He saw the gentle curve of her belly in the twilight. The question of who the biological source of the sperm was, suddenly, profoundly, the least important question in the world. Was it a coordinated effort? Did the women have a secret pact, taking lovers from a neighboring village, using him as the divine excuse to bypass the curse and the judgment of their elders? Or was it something stranger, a miracle of faith so powerful it bent the rules of biology itself? He would never ask, would never know. The ambiguity was part of the magic. He was not the source of the seed. He was the source of the permission. He was the rainmaker who didn't bring the rain, but whose dance gave the sky a reason to open up. His deception was deeper, more profound than Dr. Sharma had ever imagined. He hadn't lied about his potency. He'd allowed them to construct a potent lie. He had offered himself up as a placebo, a holy catalyst for a miracle they had to perform for themselves. His sin wasn't lust. It was a far more complex and terrible thing. It was a conspiracy of hope. You came here looking for a monster, Arthur said, his voice soft. But you were looking for the wrong kind. He finally looked the doctor in the eye, and for the first time, Sharma saw the fathomless ocean of grief that had brought him here. They needed a miracle, doctor. I just needed a family. Faith is a powerful thing. Dr. Sharma stood there for a long time, the paper shaking in his hand, his entire modern, logical worldview shattered against the rocks of this impossible reality. He saw now that Arthur wasn't the abuser. He was the accomplice, wasn't the perpetrator of the crime. He was the temple in which it was worshipped. Who was selfish? Who was saved? The question was a Mobius strip with no beginning and no end. Without another word, the doctor turned and walked back to his jeep. The next morning, he was gone. The story of the American who fathered 10 children did not end. It had only just begun. The first baby was born during the next monsoon season. It was Leela's. A healthy, beautiful girl. Arthur was the one who held her first. He looked down at the tiny, wrinkled face, the shock of black hair, and felt a love so fierce and so pure it eclipsed the lie at its heart. This child was not his by blood, but she was his by faith. She was his by destiny. 9 more followed over the next few months, 6 girls and 4 boys. The curse of Devgiri was broken. The silence was filled with the cries and gurgles of new life. The village was reborn. Arthur stayed. He never left. He aged. His hair turned white. His back stooped from years of working the fields and carrying children on his shoulders. He became the grandfather of the village, the Davapurush, the man who had brought the rain. The children grew up calling him Baba, father. He taught the boys to repair tools and the girls to read English from the few tattered books he owned. He was their patriarch, their anchor, their beloved living myth. He never spoke of his secret. The women never spoke of theirs. This was a covenant of silence, a shared, unspoken truth that was more powerful than any confession. They had all been accomplices in their own salvation. Years later, the journalist Miller wrote his story. It became a sensation, a viral phenomenon that sparked furious debates across the world. Was Arthur Finch a saint or a manipulative monster? A cultural imperialist or a selfless savior? Was love still love if it was built on a foundation of such profound deception? He was a hero to some, a demon to others. The comment sections burned with moral outrage and fierce defense. But in Devgiri, high in the quiet cradle of the Himalayas, there were no debates. It was only the rhythm of life. On his deathbed many years later, Arthur was surrounded, not by 10 women, but by their children and their children's children. A whole new generation, a forest grown from a single, borrowed seed of hope. Leela's daughter, a grown woman now with silver in her own hair, held his hand. She leaned close, her face a beautiful map of her mother's faith and the village's resilience. "Thank you, Baba," she whispered, "for choosing us." Arthur looked at the faces around him, his family, real in every way that mattered. He felt the phantom weight of a small hand in his, the echo of a boy's laugh. Noah. His lie had not been to erase Noah, but perhaps to build him a kingdom. A legacy of life over death. His gaze drifted towards the window, to the peak of the mountain, glowing in the last rays of the sun. He thought of the world beyond, the world of noise and facts and brutal, sterile truths. And he thought of this world, this beautiful, impossible lie that had become his truth, his redemption, his home. His last breath was not a sigh of regret, but of peace. But for those who knew the whole story, a haunting question would forever hang in the thin mountain air when he closed his eyes for the last time. Did the God-man of Devgiri see the face of heaven, or the terrifying, beautiful face of his own? Magnificent, unforgivable lie. The village held its breath, and the silence that answered was as profound and ambiguous as destiny itself.